Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem, amma ba'd. Respected ulama and brothers in Islam, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for joining us on this Zoom event. The format is going to be that I will go through two parts in this presentation. First part will be about Muslims' contribution to science and astronomy, and the second part will be an explanation of Ummi Hadith according to Muslim historians. First part is going to be about Muslim contribution to science and astronomy, to put in context about how the Muslims were inspired by the Quran to research about the universe. Now, if you don't hear the sound from it, let me know. Why were they inspired to research into the sciences? These were in order to calculate prayer times, because the Quran orders the prayer times to be according to the position of the sun. So Muslims wanted to calculate the position of the sun. The Quran orders them wherever they are to face Qibla. So they invented the mathematics to find the direction from different places on Earth. And of course, they are asked to calculate zakat on wealth, zakat on animals, zakat on gold, silver, and other investments and assets. And mirath, about inheritance. If a person dies, how their wealth should be distributed. And it's quite complicated because the Quran talks about division in fractions. So if you have children, how should it be divided? If you don't have children, how should it be divided? If you have parents, how should it be divided? If you don't have parents, how should it be divided? So they needed the tools to do that. And of course, the calendar system. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders us to establish a lunar calendar based on the phases of the moon. So how can we predict the phase of the moon? We will talk about more of that on the second part of the presentation. I'm going to show you a short video which I recorded back in 2008, before the days of the internet, and it was only available DVD at that time. I don't think it is available now. So that's just a clip. Let me know if you can hear the sound. Short video about Muslim contribution.
The ideas of the ancient Greeks and Romans might never have reached us had it not been for Islamic scholars and scientists who rediscovered, developed, and enriched them. And that stimulus came from the Quran, which in verse after verse calls upon mankind to examine the heavens and the earth, to reflect on creation, to look and look again. As early as the 9th century, Muslim scientists calculated the circumference of the earth, while medieval Europe hung grimly to the notion of a flat earth. Arabic numerals were developed from their Indian origins into the basis of a new arithmetic. Trigonometry, algebra, and geometry were wholly or largely Muslim inventions. Islamic medicine remains standard practice for 1,000 years.
Okay, so that's an old clip. Now, the question arises, is astronomy the invention of the non-Muslims? When I first started researching on this issue, going back about 20 years, I used to get a lot of emails and newsletters saying these science and technology are all invention of the Jews and the Christians. How true is that? This is what the Orientalists, the Western, wanted us to believe so that we take them as our superiors. But the reality is that's not true. For example, astronomy was wholly or mainly invented by early Muslim scientists to fulfill the command of the Sharia. Although they have reviewed and took research by previous nations from the Greeks or from the Hindus and refined it and improved it and passed it on. So we will look at some of the evidences of Muslim contribution that it is not entirely a non-Muslim invention, but Muslims themselves have made a great contribution to science and astronomy. The first person I am going to look at is Al-Khawarizmi, Abu Musa Al-Khawarizmi. As the video said, as early as the 9th century, he developed the numbering system in order to perform calculation commanded by the Quran. So the unwieldy Roman letters was not possible to be used in equations. So he took a numbering system, Hindu, I think partly, and then refined it and added the zero to make the Arabic numerals. And without the zero, we would not have binary numbers. And without binary numbers, we would not have computers. And you can see each of these numbers are represented based on the number of angle it has. So this was the first invention, well, one of the earliest invention in order to help the Muslims calculate inheritance, calculate zakat, calculate phases of the moon, etc. Now, how did they do that? This is astonishing considering their time. One point I want to highlight, which was passed on to by a scholar who made research into early Muslim inventions, that these shuyukhs first memorized the Quran by about age of 10, 12. And they became alim by about 17, 18. And then they went on to specialize into different fields of research, like today's PhD level. So when they went to research in different sciences, they already knew the Quran and Hadith and the rulings of Sharia. So that inspired them to look into different aspects, which was going to be beneficial or useful to the Muslims. Now, I want to show you a short clip about Al-Khawarizmi, hopefully reinforcing what I've just said. Introduction to Al-Khawarizmi, and it's recorded by the Merciful Servant, and it's available on YouTube with all other contributions. In that video, he mentions algorithm. And algorithm is a field that I personally use a lot in my work teaching computer science. And I used to work as an engineer and developing microservice-based systems before I came into the teaching field. And this algorithm is very, very important in order to design a system. It simply means a sequence of steps. This short clip by the BBC Ideas will explain a bit about algorithm. Okay, so that was introduction to the invention of numbering system, as well as algebra and trigonometry and all the different types of mathematics we teach even today up to A level were wholly largely Muslim inventions. And this is not very well known. That's because their work has been Latinized and then translated and lost the origin. The next person I'd like to look at is Abu Rayhan Al-Biruni. He came later on and used the work by Al-Khawarizmi, and he applied that in solving different mathematical problems. So calculating the phases of the moon, the circumference of the earth, and even prayer times, dawn and dusk. In ICOP some 20 years ago, when they looked at prayer times, we find that Al-Biruni has already provided established angle at which the first light reaches the earth in order to start the fasting. And that's all that work is obviously done at equatorial region, and it is widely used by the Muslims throughout the world. So we can see that Muslims invented not only sciences, but they applied it to solve our problems we face day to day. And all this was done over 1,000 years, which is known in the West as Dark Ages, when the Europe was most uncivilized. But the Middle East and the Muslim world it was called the Golden Age, because that's where all the science and invention took place. Baitul Hikmah, or House of Wisdom, where Muslim scientists used to do a lot of research. And hopefully, these historical facts should be able to convince you that science and astronomy and technology is not just the invention of the non-Muslim from the West in recent times, but it was developed by the early Muslims, and recently, due to advancement in technology, it has been refined. For example, it was possible to calculate the new moon conjunction because that's just one instant of time. But to calculate the visibility of the moon required many, many thousand times more complex calculation, because you have to calculate each point on the world map, the latitude and longitude, in order to develop the visibility curve. And the technology is simple, and the computational power was simply not available in early times. It only became available to researchers late 1980s and 90s. So if they had that tool, then we would have got this crescent visibility maps much earlier. But considering they didn't have calculators or computers using simple observations and tables, accuracy of their discoveries are, astonishing. So this concludes part one of my presentation, and what I'd like to show you some references is that the history you can take, you can read in this book, The House of Wisdom, How the Arabs Transformed Western Civilization by Jonathan Lloyd. It's a book that was given as a prize to our photo competition. And then we have 1001 Invention, all the other discoveries Muslims made. This is recorded in that book, which we also give as a prize in Ramadan in Eid time. And more specifically, Islamic calendar in the 80s, research after many decades was restarted by Dr. Muhammad Ilyas from Malaysia. And at the request of Maulana Yaqub Qasmi from Dewsbury, he made a lot of publication in journals, and he has put a lot of them in this book called The Astronomy of Islamic Calendar. So you can find more of that there. Okay, so now let's move on to the next part of the presentation.